So let's talk about the early challenges that President Washington had. The first one is the Whiskey Rebellion. Now, Alexander Hamilton had put together a plan as the Treasury Secretary that included a lot of taxes. Unfortunately, he didn't want the country to begin in debt, so he wanted to tax the people. Unfortunately, it led to a rebellion in western Pennsylvania. You see, farmers were upset about being forced to pay a tax on whiskey they made from the surplus of their corn. Rarely did the farmers have cash, so how were they going to pay a tax on whiskey? So, the resistance initially was very peaceful until July 1794, in which federal officers began to increase their efforts to collect that tax. A mob of about 500 farmers, armed with swords, guns, and pitchforks, attacked tax collectors and burned down buildings. Now, this is very similar to Shays' Rebellion. And President Washington took off his presidential hat and put on his general cap and led a group of 13,000 soldiers. This was pretty... Nobody believed that the President of the United States literally meant to be commander-in-chief, but he was. He led the troops. So the Whiskey Rebellion showed how far the people would go to protest laws. But Washington also showed how far the government was willing to go. You could protest peacefully against the government, but any threats to disturb the social order, any sorts of violence would be met with force. Now, not only was there a problem in the East with the Whiskey Rebellion, but there was also trouble in the West. The government faced problems in the West that were not as easy to resolve as Washington just walking in and stopping the revolt. Native Americans, the American Indian, had lived between the Appalachians and the Mississippi River for years, and they denied the United States had any authority over them. On many occasions, they turned to the British and the Spanish for assistance, in which both groups, the British and the Spanish, were willing to help prevent the Americans from settling. So I just want you to think a minute, why would the British and the Spanish be willing to help Native Americans stop Americans from moving farther west? Well, if you think about it long enough, you'll come up for why that's a benefit to the British and the Spanish. So we have all sorts of foreign powers involved in the West. And President Washington goes about trying to settle things peacefully, signing treaties. The problem is, the Americans refused to stop expanding farther and farther in the territories. So, Native Americans were forced to join forces with the British and the French in this case. In 1794, in fact, the governor of Canada urged Indians to destroy all American settlements that was west of the Appalachian Mountains. This was a challenge for the Americans. Take it full force. Fighting between the Americans and the natives was pretty extensive at this time. General Wayne was ordered to gain control of the Native Americans in the Ohio River Valley. And what he did is he used his knowledge of the Native Americans against them. He knew that they fasted before large battles so that their body and their mind would be clear and clean. So he spread rumors when he was going to attack, and then he postponed the attack. The natives continued to fast, waiting for this battle, and were weakened from fasting for several days. At that point, General Wayne, would attack. On August 20th, 1794, he used this tactic to defeat the Shawnee tribe at the Battle of Fallen Timbers. A year later, he forced 12 nations to sign the Treaty of Greenville, opening much of Ohio to white settlement. So, the United States in 1795 signed an agreement with Spain known as Pinckney's Treaty. Pinckney was the ambassador to Spain that established this treaty, in which it basically eliminates Spain from being a major source of conflict in the newly United States. The Spanish gave Americans unrestricted access to the Mississippi River. They dismantled all forts on the American territories, and they basically are starting to mind their own business. We're looking towards the time period when Spain is going to be removed from Florida, and in fact, Spain is going to be removed from Mexico because we're on the verge of the Mexican-American War. So this is really the first foreign policy that the Americans put together under the U.S. Constitution. Now, Washington was, in 1796, announcing that he would not seek a third term. Now, this was a precedent, once again, set that later presidents would all follow up until the 1930s and 1930s, with President Franklin Roosevelt. But Washington, his problem was a lot of health conditions. He had a variety of ailments, and he was looking forward to retirement. He had always wanted, in fact, after the war, he wanted to go back to his home and just live out his years, but he was too much of a public figure to do that. So he publishes his farewell address. Now remember, he's not going to be on TV for everybody to see his farewell address. They read it in newspapers. And what he does is he attacks several things. The first thing is he attacked political parties. He completely disagreed with political parties. And he saw it firsthand. Hamilton and Jefferson completely saw things differently. How the words in the Constitution were written and what they meant. They saw them differently. And both of them got mad at each other and would end up resigning at some point. And so Washington felt that political parties would separate the American people. He also said we should not get involved in foreign affairs. Bottom line, we need to take care of the United States and not worry about what's going on in the rest of the world. We had to create this foreign policy treaty, Pinckney's treaty with Spain, because it directly impacted Americans. But other than that, we need to mind our own business. Now, his policy and his farewell address impacted U.S. foreign policies for over 100 years. And I would challenge you to think about, when did the United States really start to get involved in the rest of the world? When did we stop worrying just about ourselves? What major event? We're going to read Washington's farewell address in class, and we're going to analyze it and see what his words exactly are. So you should be prepared after listening to this PowerPoint.